Alright guys, I'm going to walk you through one of the proofs from the 8.4 worksheet. This is letter C. We are given T as the midpoint of line segment ME, and we are also given angles G and J are congruent, and we'd like to show T as the midpoint of GJ. So, focusing on the proof statement first, if I want to show that T is the midpoint of GJ, then I need to somehow show that line segments GT and TJ are congruent so that I can state by definition of midpoint, T is the midpoint of GJ. And if you guys recall from previous work, if we can show that the two triangles are congruent, then we can show line segments GT and TJ are congruent because they're corresponding parts of congruent triangles, so they have to be congruent. So what we've been doing with our proofs, let's use the given information to show the triangles congruent, and then we can move from there. So if T is the midpoint of line segment ME, then we have that line segments MT and TE are congruent. And then again, we were given that angle G and angle J are congruent. So I'm going to go ahead and list that in the proof. So I went ahead and I wrote those three statements down. From T as the midpoint, I could state line segments MT and TE are congruent, definition of midpoint, and then I stated my other given. And then to try to make the diagram less complicated, I'm going to show what we would like to see in order to conclude our proof statement in a different color. So I need to figure out how I can show these two triangles congruent. And looking for that one other piece of information, I see there are a set of vertical angles in this diagram. And so I'm going to go ahead and note that angles GTM and ETJ are congruent because of vertical angles congruent. And if you guys are used to writing the letters next to the numbers, go for that. I mean, I have a segment here, I have a set of angles here, and a set of angles here. Looking at the diagram, this is an angle-angle side or side-angle-angle, just based off of the given sides not being between the given congruent angles. And so I can state my two triangles are congruent. Be sure that you are naming corresponding parts. So I have triangle GTM is congruent to triangle JTE, and that's by angle side is how I like to refer to it. And my two angles were proven congruent in lines 3 and 4, and my segments were stated congruent in line 2. And again, we wanted to establish triangles congruent so that we could say corresponding parts of these congruent triangles now are congruent. So we still have another set of angles that we could say are congruent and two sides that we haven't already said are congruent. And so, based off of the previous work and where we want to be with T as the midpoint of GJ, I need to state that the segments GT and TJ are congruent so that I can make that conclusion of midpoint. So, GT, that line segment, is congruent to TJ because corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. And then that lets me say T is the midpoint of GJ, that line segment GJ, by definition of midpoint. And so the problem below, the proof below, is going to be similar. In order to state something bisects an angle in letter E, we're going to have to make sure we understand what does bisect mean, what does that form, and be sure that you state those formed parts before you conclude the bisecting statement. The other proofs are hopefully reinforcing what you've already seen.